Court of Canehurst. Vile fiends are what they are. Evil leeches that drains us of our essence while sitting slothily within their beloved court. Fortunately, that's where they have kept themselves. Logarius neatly trimmed the edges of his admired silvery beard, then tidied up his moustache with a few snips at its ends. He stared into his own eyes for a long duration. He smiled his most warm and passionate smile. No, not quite. He could do better. He raised his eyebrows further along with a smile. No, too much. He squinted just slightly. No, too mean. He continued with his expressions until he found it. The compassionate smile of a true leader. Content, he wrapped his shoulders in the long mantle with the glorious and divine insignia of the healing church and prepared for business. Before exiting his quarters, he threw a final glare out his window into the autumn weather over the orange hills. He was not capable of actually seeing it, but he was well aware that over those beautiful, leaf-covered hills lay the thing most foul. The court of Canehurst. Down by his chamber staircase stood his loyal and faithful brothers, their backs straightened by their master's presence.
Master Logarius, the vicar has sent for you concerning your proposal.
Good. He calmly nodded. Then let us see to it, my brothers. Most dignified work of the gods awaits us. Commissioned by the church as a reward for their unwavering service, a special headquarters for their order had been built in the cathedral ward, close to the grand cathedral. Only the most stalwart of believers and able of bodies had the honor of becoming a sentinel of the church. These were the honor guard of the church, executing its will. And commanding the radiant guards was the most radiant, Logarius. Among them, his spiritual teachings triumphed over those in which the church lectured the public. In order to shine, one cannot simply hope to just take teachings to heart, or even live by their tenets. One must embody them with such undeniable obedience, one is graced to become a beacon. A beacon radiating light upon all, soothing the fears of the righteous and blinding the wicked. Not all were fit to endure the light of the gods, to shine themselves. Since Logarius had been chosen by the church, agents of God, he was one of few capable of finding proper beacons among mankind. And it was only to them his true teachings were imparted in their own sanctuary. Per the hierarchy's normalities, the hall outside the vicar's office was swarmed by the many officials of the church, gossiping, socializing, plotting. The congregation of clerics would only continue to grow, and there was in all reality only one's favor that was the most coveted. His concern for their ploys were dismal, The service he provided was invaluable without rivaling contenders. Who else could rally the paupers and turn them to devoted believers that kept the peace on the church's behalf? No, Logarius did not fret, for his gratification was assured. He casually strolled right on through the dignitaries' gazing rays of jealousy and into the vicar's domain with a courteous knock. Vicar Lawrence was armed with a stamp that he brought down when he entered. He gave Logarius an innocuous look and immediately placed another document from a wealthy pile in front of him. Logarius took a seat in an armchair.
Pardon the interruption.
No. I was curious about this plan of yours. He rested from the paperwork, manifested by the removal of his round glasses. It sounds unorthodox, to say the least. He turned his head and retrieved a paper from behind a bundle of books that he laid between them. A paper Logarius recognized as his own composition. How did you get this information?
You'll be astonished, Vicar, how far the lion have fallen. 'Twas trivial.
Well, I hope it is not a coup you aim to propose.
Not at all. It would not be needed. However, in light of your observation, you believe a coup would be successful,
he said rhetorically, without any response from the vicar. So he continued.
No. Their armies, as you can see, have long been stagnant. Recently they relieved themselves of many capable men. Only knights defend the castle, and I have the general's office updated on my plan.
Lawrence raised his eyebrows curiously and leaned back. Yet not a coup.
Such devious schemes are beneath us. Servants of the gods need only the righteous believers on their side. No, as you can see, my sentinels alone rival the numbers of the Canehurst knights. What I simply propose is an allocation of the local tax income. The people's hard-earned money ought not to enter through the mayor's office here in church, but to the general's office.
Lawrence crossed his arms. Sever ties with the mayor?
Indeed. The greedful mayor yet serves Canehurst. His role is void, since his superiors cannot enforce their law. You see plain how they govern these days, having let their pawn so easily fall under the church's sway. Not a single consequence has manifested. That the nobles still remain within their walls is astonishing enough.
He caught himself almost shooting up from his seat by the temper he had gradually conjured during his speech, and drew a deep breath to compose himself. If Lawrence had noted, he did not let it show, as he retained the neutral posture. He leaned forward, elbows on the table and hands folded in front of his face. Indeed, due to their silence, I wonder what Ethelbert has been communicating. His office should surely have remarked something long ago. Can you explain this? He smirked, almost too widely, as he produced a paper he only wanted to reveal to the vicar in this moment, as he had envisioned.
They are well aware, and are actively betraying the gods.
Lawrence furrowed his brows as he put on the glasses to read the letters.
They are hoarding the funds for themselves. What they say returns to Canehurst simply falls into their pockets. We would have seen the nobles' wrath long ago if they cared for losing such an asset. As to why their interest has absconded, I cannot honestly say. I can only add, good riddance.
Lawrence looked up at him from behind the glasses. You've been spying on him. Lawrence skeptically embedded his gaze into Logarius' unwavering eyes. Logarius, he smirkingly said. This plan does not sound much like the work the church ought to dabble in. Will we not become exactly what you loathe so in the mayor? Logarius had his patience slightly tested, and he leaned forward.
Good is still good, and evil is still evil. Both the nobles and the mayor are of the same evil intent. Ours are good, for the people. By committing a, per se, evil deed, one does not lose favor with the gods, for the intent is pure and true. Evil knows not this purity, and the good may at times never hope to overcome said evil without adapting to their means.
The vicar's eyes did not change the emotion they conveyed. He leaned in closer, eyes still deeply connected to his. Can you, with the gods as witness, tell me now that you can accomplish this? That you have the word of the General's office to let the support come from us, and without provoking the ire of the nobles? Logarius gave only a quick nod, but it relayed his confidence supremely. Then do what you see fit, but in quiet. Lawrence donned his glasses and took hold of the discarded stamp to quickly resume his work. His men had dutifully awaited their master and were stirred up by his emergence.
We have grand work ahead of us. Most holy work indeed.
Logarius declared with his prophetical smile. Master, forgive my unawareness, but I wish to partake in your enlightenment. Would it not make us evil if we committed evil acts towards one another? Logarius, tall as he was, loomed over his disciple and placed a hand on his church-garbed shoulder.
No, my brother. Our intentions are for the good people. We wish only to be good in our endeavors. Sometimes, good men are forced by evil men to commit evil deeds. But if your heart is pure, you will remain a good soul.
The man appeared reassured and convinced by his words and his hard grip. Like many other nights, the moon shone between the tall towers of Castle Cainhurst. But on the most favourable nights, the window light shone like stars in the darkness. On this night, the biggest and brightest were those of the second grandest ballroom, deployed when the nobles not housed within the castle grounds congregated. Celestine felt extraordinarily delighted in her choice of garment, as she had waited long for a proper occasion to first display it. Tonight she and her husband had opted to bring their most well-behaved little darling to the ball, as it was high time she was exposed to a proper environment. Besides, there still was the entertaining drama regarding an incident of a foul-mouthed little brat that delightedly stirred the court. Celestine was confident that her own Ghislaine would make a prime example of expertly parenting.
If Romuald have declined, we will not stay long.
Her husband Arnaud commented ruggishly on their way inside.
Indeed, and especially if Bernice is present, I swear, that commendation of hers will eventually be the death of me.
I despise that man of hers. A vile criminal. Both our woes would vanish as soon as I find just a smidge in his records.
They quieted down as they reached the grand ballroom door, which was sentineled by decorative knights who immediately clutched at the round, ornate door handles.
Captain,
one addressed Arnaud as he nodded at him.
You behave now?
Celestine hissed quickly and quietly to Ghislaine as they passed on through. Entering the grand ballroom was as if the night turned into midday in the span of a second. The gloom was banished by the golden in terror, lit by gargantuan chandeliers and a bustling open floor. The musicians playing of violins and cellos filled the hall with acceptable music. The royal pair had yet to arrive, as expected.
They did not come tonight.
Arnaud commented with a pleased smirk, barely noticeable to anyone other than herself.
Please, they will not return until at least 3 full moons, dear. Mother, can we go?
Ghislaine tugged at the ends of her ball gown and pointed longingly at the table overflowing with appetizers and desserts.
Restrain yourself, child.
Arnaud lectured her like he would to an adult.
'Tis not befitting to partake of the treats on arrival. Remember that. Firstly, we give the attendees a chance to observe our coming.
When can we go, father?
You know the pigs down in Hemwick. They are greedy and gluttonous creatures. You will look just like one of them if you dare to target the appetizers table on arrival. Compose yourself and assert your surroundings. If none approaches you first, which is not ideal, then you approach someone.
He looked out over the room as if illustrating his advice, while simultaneously hoping for someone to approach. When none did, much to his visible displeasure, he leaned closer to Celestine and nodded in the direction of another pair. It was Romuald and Fleurette. Fleurette sighted them coming and nudged her husband, who turned his burly frame towards them. Unlike Arnaud, who had donned his formal captain's armor that was less for battle and more fitting for touring the ballroom floor, Romuald was dressed in a Canehurst black coat with red laces and an almost too acceptable large collar. Fleurette dressed to match her husband, red-laced patterns running down her black gown in a tasteful and accentuating manner. Although Celestine even considered complimenting her friend on the style, she still considered her own attire the finest and refrained from doing so. Romuald smiled widely so his goatee stretched across the whole face.
"Oh, Captain."
He embraced Arnaud and kissed the air around his right cheek, then quickly turned to do the same with Celestine's left cheek.
"Thank the ancestors you came. A terrible dolesome night otherwise." "Oh, you shame me, friend. Celestine, shining as brightly as ever."
Oh, you charmer. Anything new from the country? We'd love to know.
"Ah!"
He waved grandiosely with his hand.
"Mere logistics and numbers. Terribly dull in comparison with the escapades of the night, Captain." "You jest, Romuald. You tend to leave out the fortune those numbers give you."
He grinned widely and unbearably, like he was itching to brag about it.
Of course. But we know of that as it is. But pray tell, what are the machinations of the court?"
Oh, you will love this,
Celestine exclaimed, perhaps a bit too enthusiastic than she would like to appear.
Ahem.
Arnaud interrupted her.
"Perhaps our little angel have awaited long enough. She has in fact stayed politely silent. Don't you think it's proper to approach the treats?"
Celestine sighed.
Right, darling. Would you accompany us, Fleurette?
She nodded. They left the two gentlemen to their own discussions, as Ghislaine was walking slightly faster than her mother, still holding her hand.
What were you saying before the boss got tired?
Fleurette asked while they stood at the table.
There was a delightedly embarrassing incident at a banquet the other day. Before we were seated, Her Majesty naturally toured the room, making conversations. You know Sylvian? Yes, his daughter was with them when Her Majesty and him ensued a conversation of history. And then the little imp proclaimed the ancestry line to be unsubstantiated. She did not. What did Her Majesty do?
They both grinned and delighted terribly in this embarrassment, while Ghislaine very properly plucked from the treats on a small dish plate.
She had the intention of showing the little one its place, and rightly told that the line has never once strayed, and it is well documented. But the child was persistent, and was of the opinion that with today's science one could analyze blood. Well, I am no scientist, But if anything, that is what sounds unsubstantiated. What a mouth on her! I thought the exact same. Her Majesty concluded that if she was so certain of herself, she ought indeed go and find out. And she gave Sylvian the most dreadful glare before walking away. He nor his wife have attended any gathering since, and will likely not do so for some time. That is incredible. Oh, how I wish to have been here for it.
Little Ghislaine returned with an acceptable ensemble on her platter and went to show what she had plucked out to her approaching father. He gave her an approving nod, and she smiled excitedly.
I was just hearing about the knight's little businesses,
he informed the two ladies, while he took one of the glasses of crimson liquid from the table. Romuald partook of another as his empty glass had been swooped up by a servant long before.
Apologies once more for the insistent mess. Don't give it too much thought. That's how the rabble are.
What now?
Celestine curiously asked.
Intrigues in the country?
Hardly. Simply the unfortunate conclusion to businesses.
Oh, but I demand details all the same.
Since you are so irresistible, your valorous husband's knights dispatched the frenzied mess of a man that supplied wheat to the many farmsteads. He had an unfortunate fall from grace into, well, a less admirable form.
Oh my! I so dread the notion of such foulness.
Don't fret, my dear. All was under control.
Romuald peered over his shoulder and leaned in closer.
You see, his son and I got along very splendidly, and he was in succession to his father's estates. So I started to supply him with a little of the old crimson. Then I informed Arnaud to send frequent patrols around his property. And soon enough, he had overindulged, and the knights did their job splendidly.
Oh my. So that's what you were smirking about?
Arnaud shrugged with a delighted smile.
The letters had contained everything, but I suspected you wanted to hear the gossip from the man himself.
She guided his face closer to her with her hand and gave him a light kiss on his lips.
A terrific and fiendish story. I love it.
He held up his glass with a tantalizing crimson liquid, and she swiped up a glass for herself and clinked them together.
If only those knights could start to be more discreet, it would have been perfect,
he grumbled.
Forget it. It may not be tasteful, but it keeps them in check with some occasional sporting diversion.
On the sidelines, attendants started to bow and make way for what could only be the main attraction. Emerging from the crowd towered the admirable tall figure of His Majesty, with the illustrious and uncannily beautiful Queen at his side. They both completely disregarded every gesture made towards them, as usual. The king scanned the room, searching for someone specific. It was only in one's dream where it was oneself the king fixed his stoic eyes upon. And so, Celestine must have indeed been dreaming, for when the king's gaze stroked past her, he stopped. With an obvious gesture, he raised his free hand and made a quick, regal wave to summon them. Her heart skipped a beat, and she grabbed hold of her husband tightly to support herself amidst the excitement.
Come, dear. We have been summoned.
Arnaud turned his head slowly, having already understood what was in the making.
Keep an eye on Ghislaine.
She whispered over her shoulder, but did not bother to look. The attendants all made way for the pair, and she reveled in the attention. His Majesty continued to look at them as they approached. A well-kept man with impeccable symmetrical features. Pale, as per the Canehurst standard, with a black and sharp goatee and shoulder-long hair. The Queen stood at his side, having not yet acknowledged their coming. Her features were royally stunning, and she would remain a clear royal had she assumed the position of a peasant. A silvery, eternal goddess. Hair as white as the snow and glittering as the purest metal. Her skin looked as soft as pale silk. They bowed exquisitely and in unison before the royal pair. Only then did Queen Annalise look their way.
Captain Arnaud.
The king's voice boomed without equal. It could be heard from any distance as it gripped the hall. Though it was terribly impolite to eavesdrop, it was apparent that every other conversation was toned down so all could catch wind of what they spoke of.
"'Tis a wholesome eve."
Rightly, Your Majesty.
"Celestine, are the children in sound health?"
She cursed herself for not bringing Ghislaine.
Bright as stars. Humble thanks for your concern.
Arnaud, the knights do bear a favourable morale. Canst thou declare the cause thereof?
Your Majesty, yes. There was an ordeal to shape them up after my progenitor.
Thou didst not shrink from the labour. Under a true captain, even common knights canst fare greatly. We would see thy efforts come to fruition. An ambitious leader such as thou couldst find prosperity in any commanding station.
The king looked out at his subject, like he had just announced this conversation.
We must speak again, in private, more intimately. Thine is a future we would fain see grow.
The glamorous pair looked ahead in unison and floated away further into the ballroom. Arnaud stood petrified. Celestine quickly removed a bead of sweat from his forehead. To have the court gather for one's sake was the undying dream of its members. Though Berengar did not live up to the ecstatic nature anticipated from such a member. He knew this to be just, that his actions, however treacherous, stood for what was right. He was no fool to how the nobles were improperly entitled to many things, but no one has the right to deprive anyone of their heritage. He had hid himself in the antechamber, intent on avoiding the attention of anyone that would be inclined to approach, mostly for his own meager mental well-being, as he could very well be taken for a fool. The sinister eyes of the pale nobles would likely just induce a spontaneous and foolish escape. The bustling of the throne hall grew louder and intense as the court gathered beyond the open archway. His anxiety increased for every new voice added to the murmur. It was, he thought, at least a good sign that the royal pair had called for such a gathering on very little. Could it be that they deliberately wanted to make a fool out of the scholarly deviant? Or did they value their perception of heritage? The hall plunged into silence, likely due to the entrance of the Majesty. He peeked around the doorway to see them walk out towards their thrones. He slunk out and stood to the sides, concealed from their field of view by the pillars.
Berengar,
The herald cried out.
announce thyself before the Majesty of Cainhurst, for our summons hath been made by thy own accord.
He took a quick, composing inhale before he walked on to the red carpet leading up to the thrones. The glares alone from all the attendants could make anyone's legs crumple, but the thought of his intent filled him with resolve to remain firm. He had never been in the giant throne hall of the royal pair, a magnificently marbled work with pillars lining his approach. The floor was polished to the degree it looked as if a sheet of glass lay over it. Along his way stood the entire court, with their eyes curiously and maliciously examining him, judging him. He stopped and knelt down, with the left arm on his chest and the other graciously extended to his right.
Welcome home, Berengar,
The king greeted.
We had hoped to have word of thee sooner.
He kept his head lowered and mouth shut.
Bergenworth doth tread upon hallowed ground. Would not a true and pure-blooded descendant have raised objection to the breaking of the seal? Would not thou, or any among this court, have uttered the slightest protest?
I did not, Your Majesty. Both their faces remained unflinching, the king's eyes firmly attached to him, while the queen had her eyes averted.
What, I pray thee, made thee so suddenly deem it to be our blood? And by what means did it come into thy possession? For we know full well that the plebeian manner of extracting blood would be naught but blasphemy.
We did not face the revered ancestors. What was discovered was a treasury of holy blood. One of these vials was special. I believe your majesty must observe it with your own eyes.
The king turned to the queen. They made expressionless eye contact, and he stood from his throne, tall and mighty.
Present the relic forthwith.
He reached out a hand, and Berriger took out the vial from his inner pocket. He held his hand together like a cup, bowed his head down, and extended the item to the king.
Note the symbol, your majesty,
he said as he felt the little thing lift from his palms. The king raised one eyebrow at him, then examined the vial. His firm eyes caught the rune, and they became soft. A sort of appearance the king would dislike having to display, but they likely did not care or noticed. He turned towards the queen and held it up to her. Queen Annalise never smiled, nor did the king. Were anyone to ever see any of them smile, they would likely firstly think something was wrong, that madness had claimed their esteemed rulers. It was not very noticeable, and the king himself stood largely in view's way, but Berengar saw from where he knelt how the queen took a deep breath and in the exhale revealed a sensitive smile.
A chalice, I demand.
The king ordered, without taking his eyes away from the queen. She continued to stare at the symbol.
This symbol. How came this to be?
She spoke gently, but never looked his way while the king retrieved the cup a servant had scrambled to collect.
It was the work of a mysterious rune-writer at Bergenworth, your majesty. She had done it once before, making people see more than there was to certain things. And when she produced this symbol, I knew.
A clever one indeed. We would extend our gratitude unto her.
The king had poured the crimson content of the flask into the chalice and gave it to the queen. It was about the amount of a meager 3 or 4 gulps. She drank it abruptly, but with composure in front of the whole court, triggering a low murmur from the spectators. When she removed the empty chalice, she had drunk so eagerly that a little speck of crimson dotted the corner of her mouth. It stood out exquisitely on her greyish lips and pale skin.
And unto thee as well,
she said to him while she looked straight into his eyes. He had to steel himself not to waver his gaze, as her own was ghastly sharp and intimidating.
The lineage that once was,
the king announced to the whole court,
in its purity, hath returned unto its rightful descendants. It is our purpose to devote the whole of our being to the sanguine augur. In due time, the unseen form shall bless our line with a child, one who shall reign in perfection, as our forebears intended.
He turned to the queen, who had sat still. They were both quiet, and the queen nearly appeared as if asleep, her chest raised and lowered faster and heavier than usual. This kept on for a moment while the court remained silent, as they could not bear themselves to interrupt the event. The queen's breath slowed to normal, and she looked to her king.
We are prepared.
With her delicate nails, she opened her own vein on her arm, and the king knelt before her to take hold of it gently. He drank deep, sucking out the blood from her. Not for long, and not greedily, only enough. Then he looked up at her and sat down on his throne.
Depart, for the court is hereby dismissed.
The dismayed nobles all started evacuating in a low murmur. Berengar stayed. For both the majesties had their eyes pierced into him, commanding him in place. When the hall was empty, the queen spoke.
Our thanks unto thee, Berengar. Thou hast shown forth precisely that which we require.
The queen's voice was gentle like a child, despite her being a powerful matriarch in appearance. It was motherly, and he thought that he could easily go without a reward, for this was enough.
There is much labour yet to be wrought, and we are in need of steadfast champions such as thyself. Dost thou desire to see the line endure?
I do, for the honor of Cainhurst, your majesty.
Then partake of our ancient blood. Become our shadowed hunter, the herald of our forthcoming glory.
The queen reached out her arm where the wound was no more. She slit it open once again, just for him. He inched closer, completely captivated by the privilege, and wanted only to embrace her favor. He was afraid to touch her, and reached out for her arm carefully and hesitantly. She in turn brought it slightly closer, laying it within his grasp willingly, with calmly pouring veins pointed to him. He drank like the king had. Her blood flowed down his throat and burned terribly. He had to stop because the sensation was too much. He staggered back and groaned.
Revel in the corruption. Such is the very nature of Queen Yharnam's sacred blood.
It was painful, but along came a sensation of incredible ecstasy and power. The pain was immense and unbearable because it indeed was true might beyond comprehension. And in that moment, it was his.
Let corruption purge thy core, and cast out the feeble man thou once wast. Become our steadfast hunter of blood.
Knight's garb. Attire of the Knights of Canehurst. A regal piece graced by intricate goldwork. The Canehurst way is a mix of nostalgia and bombast. They take great pride even in the blood-stained corpses of beasts that they leave behind, confident that they will stand as examples of decadent art.